The Canadian Shield doesn't forgive weakness. It doesn't soften its edges for sentiment or slow its rivers for grief. When the spruce forest closes in around a homestead in northern Ontario, it closes in completely, and whatever a person was before they arrived there, the land decides what they'll be after. Maren Hollis had decided wrong about the land, and the land had answered accordingly. She found this out in her 53rd year, when her left knee gave out on the trail to the lower pasture, and she lay in the mud for 20 minutes before her dog found her. By the time she reached the house, she already knew. She'd known for a year, truthfully. But a woman who has run a working farm alone for 11 years learns to postpone the things she can't afford to think about. Her daughter had moved to Halifax. Her son-in-law had opinions about what should happen next. The farmhand she'd relied on for 6 seasons had gone back to his family in Sudbury, and the land, which had never once waited on anyone's convenience, was waiting on no one now. This was where things stood on the morning that a truck she didn't recognize pulled off the gravel road and idled at her gate. She was on the porch with her coffee, watching it the way a person watches weather they haven't accounted for. The truck was old, green once. The driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. Young, somewhere in her late 20s, wearing work clothes that had seen real work and carrying a canvas bag over one shoulder the way people carry things they've learned not to put down. She stood at the gate with the particular stillness of someone who has been turned away before and is preparing to be turned away again. She called out across the yard. "Mrs. Hollis?" Maren set down her coffee. "Who's asking?" "My name is Della Ironwood," the woman said. "My grandfather asked me to find you." Maren looked at her for a long moment. The bag. The boots, steel-toed and cracked along the left heel. The way she held herself, not timid, but careful. The careful of someone who has spent time in places where carelessness costs something. "Come through the gate," Maren said. "But stay on the path." Della came through. She was 28, as it turned out, or said she was. Cree, clearly. Her grandmother's people from the Moose Cree First Nation, she'd say later, though that first morning she didn't offer it, and Maren didn't ask. She had dark eyes that took in the yard methodically, the way a person reads a room they may need to work in, and she did not smile the way people smile when they want something. She looked at Maren directly. "Your grandfather," Maren said. "Who is he to me?" He said you'd ask that. Della set the bag down at her feet. "He said to tell you. Pickle Lake, 1987, he said you'd know." Maren knew. Pickle Lake, 1987. She'd been 22, newly married, 3 weeks into what her husband had called a fishing trip, and she'd called the first real test of the marriage. The truck had broken an axle on the road north of the lake, and she'd been the one who flagged down a passing half-ton. The man who stopped had been somewhere in his 60s even then, tall and quiet, with a kind of competence about him that made everything feel slightly more manageable. He'd helped them fix the axle. He'd shared his coffee and his silence. He hadn't asked for anything. His name had been Joseph Ironwood. She hadn't thought about him in years. "Joseph's your grandfather," she said. "Was," Della said. The same flat correction, the same weight in that single syllable. "He died in the fall." Maren was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry. He wasn't." Della said it without bitterness, just fact. He said he'd had a long enough run. She reached into the canvas bag and produced an envelope, plain and white, slightly bent at one corner. "He wrote you a letter. Before the end." Maren took the envelope. She did not open it on the porch. "There's tea inside," she said instead. "Take your boots off at the door." She read the letter at the kitchen table, while Della stood near the window, not quite in the room, not quite out of it, occupying that particular threshold that belongs to people who have learned to wait without assuming they'll be invited further. Joseph's handwriting was large and slow, the handwriting of a man who had lived most of his life outdoors and found pen slightly suspicious. "Maren," it began. No preamble, no apology. Joseph Ironwood had not been a man for preambles. If Della found you, it means she made it. That's the first good news. The second is that I am not writing to ask for anything on my own account. I am past the age of that. I am writing because my granddaughter is in a situation I cannot fix from where I'm going, and you are the only person I have trusted unconditionally since 1987. Della is a good worker, better than good. She is the kind of person who looks at a broken thing and fixes it, and then looks for the next broken thing without being asked. She was studying agricultural sciences in Guelph until her money ran out and the program changed its structure, and a number of other things happened that I will let her tell you in her own time. What I can tell you is this. She is not looking for charity, and she will not accept it. She is looking for a fair wage, honest work, and somewhere to land long enough to figure out what comes next. I thought of your farm because I know it is working land and because I know you are a fair woman. I am not asking you to take her in like a daughter. I am asking you to give her a season. After that, if she wants to go, let her go. If she wants to stay, let her decide. You told me once, sitting by that broken-down truck on the Pickle Lake Road, that you'd always wished your own children had wanted the land the way you did. I told you sometimes that kind of wanting skips a generation and shows up somewhere you're not looking for it. I don't know if I was right, but I'm asking you to find out. Your old friend, Joseph. Marin folded the letter. She looked across the kitchen at Della, who was studying a framed photograph on the windowsill with the careful attention of someone who isn't sure if they're allowed to look. He had no business doing this, Marin said quietly. No, Della agreed. He didn't. She looked up from the photograph, meeting Marin's eyes without flinching. I want to be clear about what I'm asking for. Not a room, not a favor, not anyone's pity. Seasonal work, fair wage, and I'll sleep in the equipment shed if that's what's available. I've slept in worse. The equipment shed isn't habitable, Marin said. I've slept in worse, Della said again, and the simplicity of it told Marin everything she needed to know about the past 2 years of this woman's life. Marin looked at the letter in her hands. Outside, the October wind was moving through the spruce trees along the north fence line with a long, searching sound like something trying a door it wasn't sure would open. She stood up. The back bedroom has a cot. Supper's at 6. She walked toward the hallway, then stopped. One thing, she said without turning. My husband's workshop is the red shed by the creek. I don't go in there. I don't talk about it. I need you to know that before anything else. A pause. Understood, Della said. Marin went down the hall. Della looked at the folded letter still on the kitchen table. The letter that had mentioned nothing about any workshop or any red shed, and understood, for the first time, exactly how much weight this woman had been carrying alone. Before we go any further, I want to stop for just a moment, because I know there are people listening to this who have a room in their own life they don't open. A door they keep closed for reasons that made sense once and have calcified into habit since. That's not a flaw. That's just what surviving costs sometimes. Keep that in mind as this story goes on. Now let's go back to that farm in northern Ontario. The first 2 weeks were built on silence and small practical exchanges. Della was up before 5 without being told, had coffee made before Marin reached the kitchen, and had already done a visual survey of the south fence before breakfast was cleared. By the third day, she had identified 3 posts that were rotting at the base and replaced them, not with the quick patch Marin had been applying for 2 seasons, but with a proper repair, tamped gravel and pressure-treated lumber, done right. By the end of the first week, she had also fixed the drainage issue behind the equipment shed, rebalanced the tractor's front left wheel, and quietly reorganized the tool shed in a way that Marin noticed but said nothing about for 2 days because she was deciding whether to be irritated or relieved. She landed on relieved. They didn't talk much. Marin asked about the work. Della answered in facts. Della asked about the land. Marin answered in facts. Between those exchanges, they built a functional, workable quiet. The kind that isn't empty but isn't intimate either. A shared acknowledgement that 2 people are occupying the same space and managing it without collision. On the 11th day, the situation changed. Marin was moving a section of temporary fencing along the east paddock when her knee went. Not dramatically, just a sideways collapse. a moment of nothing where there should have been support, and then she was on the ground in the frozen mud with the morning sky above her, and a very clear understanding that getting up was going to be more complicated than it looked. Della appeared within 2 minutes. She crouched beside Marin without exclamation or panic. "Which knee? Left. Can you move it?" Marin moved it, painful but functional. "Then nothing's broken." Della put an arm under Marin's shoulder. "Don't push off with that foot. Let me take the weight." "I've been getting up by myself for 11 years, Marin said, which came out sharper than she intended. "I know," Della said. "That's apparent." She didn't say it unkindly. She said it the way you'd report a finding, neutral, accurate, slightly inconvenient. Marin almost said something. She stopped herself. She accepted the help. For the rest of that afternoon, she found herself aware of exactly where Della was in the yard. Not watching her, not quite, but registering her the way you register a sound that's been absent and has now returned. At supper, they didn't mention the fence or the fall, but something had shifted in the shape of the quiet between them, and they both knew it. It started the way those things always start, with something small. A frost warning on the radio, the third night of the second week, and both of them moving at the same time to cover the kitchen garden. They worked in the dark by headlamp, tucking frost cloth over the late kale and the cold, hardy parsley, neither of them speaking, the breath coming white in the cold air. At some point, Marin looked up, and Della was already at the far end of the row, doing the thing Marin had been about to think of, which was securing the cloth's edge with lengths of scrap lumber so the wind couldn't lift it. She hadn't told her. Della had just seen it. When they came back inside, Della made tea without asking. Set it on the table with 2 cups, and Marin, who had not sat down with another person at this kitchen table voluntarily in 11 years, sat down. "He used to talk about you," Della said after a while. Marin looked up. "My grandfather. He'd say, 'There's a woman in northern Ontario who fixed a cracked axle in the rain without complaining once,' and then said, 'Well, that's that,' like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. He said you were the most unsentimental, practical person he'd ever met, and he meant it as the highest possible compliment." "He was generous," Marin said. "He was precise," Della said, and the way she said it, not flattery, just observation, made Marin look at her differently. The way you look at someone you've been trying to categorize when the category suddenly doesn't fit. "What are you going to do?" Marin asked. "After the season, where will you go?" Della was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she said. "I had a plan. Before my grandfather got sick, I had a 5-year plan." A pause. "I think about it like a map that got left in the rain. The shape is still there, but the details are gone." Marin looked at the table. She said nothing. But something shifted in her chest. Quietly, without announcement, the way a door moves when the wind changes direction, not blown open but no longer fully closed. That night alone, she thought about the workshop by the creek for the first time in months. They drove into Hearst together on the last Friday of October. Supplies. No way around it. Marin had been quiet on the drive. She could feel the town before they arrived in it, the particular quality of attention that small communities extend to anything unexpected. She and Della tied the truck outside the co-op, and she caught 2 sets of eyes on them before they'd crossed the parking lot. Curious, not cruel, but measuring. Inside, Greta at the cash was polite in the way that means nothing yet, the careful neutrality of someone who hasn't decided. The trouble came in the hardware aisle. A man named Douglas Petit, wide through the shoulders, local contractor, the kind of man who had always been in rooms first and expected to stay that way, looked at Della the way that some men in some towns look at women who haven't been accounted for. "You Carter's new girl," he said, addressing Marin but not looking at her. The word girl dropped into the aisle like a stone into cold water. Marin stopped. She turned to look at Petit with the calm that is not peaceful but is very certain. "She's my land manager," Marin said, "and the only reason the east paddock fence is standing properly this winter. So I'd suggest you move out of the way and let us finish our shopping." Petit looked at her, looked at Della, looked back at Marin. He moved. Loading the truck in the parking lot, Della said, You didn't have to do that." "I know," Marin said. "Why did you?" Marin closed the tailgate. "Because it was accurate," she said. "And because accurate things should be said out loud occasionally," she got in the truck. After a moment, Della got in too. On the road home, the silence between them was different from any silence before it. Warmer, more settled, like a room where the windows have been properly weather-stripped for the first time. Neither of them commented on it. Douglas Petit, it turned out, had a cousin who worked for the land registry office. On a Tuesday afternoon in the 6th week, Marin came back from checking the back pasture to find Della at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, not files or documents, drawings. Botanical sketches, dozens of them, detailed to the point of being scientific. Root structures of local hardwoods, the seed heads of native grasses, the layered cross-section of a boreal soil profile. And among them, architectural. The farm's drainage pattern rendered in clean structural lines, the equipment shed's framing marked with measurements and notes, the slope of the south field annotated in pencil with calculations for runoff management, and one drawing she hadn't expected, the farm from the air, done entirely from observation and memory, the lane and the buildings and the creek and the tree line placed with a precision that wasn't guesswork. Della was in the doorway. Marin waited for her to be embarrassed. She wasn't. "My grandfather taught me," Della said. "He said if you can draw a system, you understand it. If you can draw it from memory, you understand it well enough to fix it when it breaks." Marin picked up the aerial drawing. She looked at it for a long moment, at the way it caught the exact curvature of the creek, the way the drainage fell, the way the tree shelter on the west side made the farmhouse warmer than any other building on the property. Della had been watching this land, not passively, with the dedicated attention of someone trying to understand something they meant to take seriously. "This," Marin said. "You should be doing this." "I was," Della said, "in Guelph. Land systems design, sustainable agriculture." A brief pause. "It didn't work out. What happened?" Della looked at the table. "I ran out of money in second year. There was a funding situation that changed. I was going to reapply, but then my grandfather got sick, and I went back, and then the next year just went." She said it quietly. Not self-pity, just accounting. Marin set the drawing down carefully. Not like paper, like something that had cost something. "Could you do something for me?" she said. "What?" "Draw the drainage plan. The one you've been working out in your head for the North Field." Marin looked at her steadily. "The real version. The one you'd implement if it were your land." Della looked up. Something in her face that Marin couldn't read moved quietly through its register. "All right," she said. "Give me 2 days." She gave her one. The plan was 8 pages, detailed, sequenced, annotated with cost estimates and seasonal timing. Marin read it twice. Then she set it down and looked at the window for a while. "This is good work," she said. "Yes," Della agreed. She had stopped pretending otherwise. Marin looked at her. "Have you thought about correspondence programs? There are agricultural colleges with remote delivery. I have a satellite connection now." Della was quiet for a moment. "I've thought about it." "Thinking about it and doing it are different things." "I know that," Della said, and something in her voice was tired and steady, and something else. Something that hadn't had space to be present until just recently in this kitchen, on this farm, where for the first time in 2 years no one was requiring her to not take up space. That evening, Della was not at supper. Marin found her at the creek, sitting on the bank in the dark with her coat pulled up and her face doing something complicated. "Della," she looked up. Her eyes were wet. Not crying, the aftermath of it, quickly set aside. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something my grandfather didn't put in the letter because he knew if he did, you'd have made a different decision." Marin sat down on the bank beside her. "There's a man," Della said. "His name is Harlan Burke. He manages 3 of the large agricultural properties north of here, leased crown land, mostly. My grandfather's property borders one of them, and Harlan Burke has been trying to absorb that land for 2 years. There's a clause in the way the lease is structured that if no member of the Ironwood family is in active residence and use of the property by the end of the calendar year, the land goes into an open lease process. She paused. Which Burke will win, because he has the resources and the connections to make sure he does. Marin was quiet. My grandfather's property, Della continued, is where his parents built, where he was born, where I spent every summer for 18 years. It's 43 acres of bush and river and the best hay field in the region. Her voice was steady. Steady the way things are steady when they've been held in place deliberately. I can't hold that land from here. I'd need to be there, but I can't afford to operate it alone. And Burke knows that. He's been waiting. Why didn't Joseph tell me? Marin said. Della looked at the creek. Because he wanted you to want me here, she said. Not because you felt sorry for us. Not because you felt obligated to fix a problem. He wanted you to decide on your own terms first. A pause. He said, if she doesn't want her there for who she is, then she won't want her there for any reason that lasts. There it is. That's what gets me about Joseph Ironwood. He could have put all of it in that letter. The land, the lease, the deadline. He chose not to. He chose to trust Marin's judgment over a dying man's leverage. I've been thinking about that ever since I first heard this story. What it takes to trust someone that much when you know you won't be there to see if you were right. Marin was quiet for a long time after Della finished speaking. She looked at the creek where the last of the October water was running dark under a thin skin of new ice at the edges. Then she stood up. I'm going inside, she said. Come in when you're ready. She lay awake that night with the workshop on her mind, the red shed by the creek where her husband's tools still hung on their pegs the way he'd left them. She hadn't opened that door in 11 years. She'd been maintaining the prohibition the way you maintain a habit that no longer serves you but feels too dangerous to question. Somewhere around midnight, she admitted something to herself she'd been refusing to look at for 6 weeks. The farm was better with Della in it. Not just functionally, though that was undeniable. It was better in the way that a place is better when someone else understands it and has decided it's worth their full attention. The drainage plan. The drawings. The way Della looked at the east paddock fence, not as a problem to patch, but as a system to correct. Marin had been managing this land alone for 11 years because there was no other option. She had not been taking care of it the way she once had. She had not had the energy. She wanted Della to stay. It wasn't charity. It wasn't Joseph's letter, though that had started it. It was something she didn't have an efficient word for. Something that had grown in 6 weeks of early mornings and shared work and one conversation at a table she hadn't used for company in more than a decade. She was afraid of it, the way you're afraid of a thing that costs something if it goes wrong. In the morning, she drove to Hearst alone. She went to the Agricultural Extension Office and asked about the Crown land lease provisions north of Cochrane. The agent confirmed the window and added, with the careful precision of someone who was also telling her something between the lines, that an established agricultural operator in good standing could provide a formal employment and co-management agreement that would satisfy residency and use requirements for an extended property if. And here he paused long enough to be meaningful. The documentation was filed before December 31st. What would that documentation look like? Marin asked. A registered working agreement, he said. Partnership designation, or, and he paused again, a formal co-ownership transfer if both parties were in agreement. Marin said nothing. She drove home slowly, letting the truck find its own speed on the 2-lane highway through the spruce, thinking the whole way. By the time she pulled into the lane, she knew what she wanted to say. Not because of the land. Not because of Joseph's letter, but because she had spent 11 years being a woman who'd stopped letting anyone in, and she was slowly, carefully, undeniably tired of it. She found Della splitting wood behind the shed. Della. Della looked up. I want you to stay, Marin said. She said it the way she said everything that mattered, directly, without preparation, accepting whatever came back. Not for the season. Properly, I want to talk about a co-management arrangement on this property and a formal agreement that satisfies the lease provisions on your grandfather's land. But I want to be clear that the arrangement part is secondary. She looked at her. The first part is that I want you to stay. I want you to be here. That's the thing I'm saying. Della set down the axe. She didn't answer right away. That was her way. Not hesitation, but the quiet of someone who takes words seriously enough not to answer them lightly. The wind came through the trees. A raven turned overhead in a long, unhurried arc. I told myself I wasn't going to let this happen, Della said finally. Let what happen? This. She gestured at the yard, the farmhouse, the frozen creek, the woodpile she'd been splitting. I told myself, one season, honest work, figure out the next step. That's all this was supposed to be. I know, Marin said. That's what I told myself, too, when I agreed to it. Della looked at her for a long moment. My grandfather was very sure about you, she said. He barely knew me. He knew you in the way that counts, Della said. 40 minutes on a road in the rain. He always said that was enough time to know whether a person was honest. Marin looked at the woodpile. She said nothing. I want to say yes, Della said. But I need to know what yes means. I need it to be something real, not charity dressed up in paperwork. It's a working partnership, Marin said. You run the land systems. I run the livestock. We split the decisions and the work, and eventually, if you want it, you take on a formal share of the property. Your grandfather's land gets covered in the agreement. She paused. And I'll push you to finish your degree by correspondence, which you'll hate me for, but I intend to do it anyway. Della looked at her for a moment. Then something crossed her face. Not quite a smile, but the structural precondition for one. He knew, she said quietly. He knew exactly what this would become. Your grandfather knew a lot of things, Marin said. Stubborn old man, said. He was. She looked at Della. Well? Della picked up the axe. She looked at the remaining pile of wood, then back at Marin. I'll need to think about the co-ownership timeline, she said, and I want the agreement in writing before December. And I'm finishing the North Field drainage plan before we do any paperwork. She paused. But yes, I think the answer is yes. Harlan Burke arrived on a Wednesday, as men like Harlan Burke tend to do, midweek, uninvited, accompanied by a man he introduced as his associate and a folder of documents he held with the confidence of someone who has never been told no by anyone with less money than him. He walked past Marin toward Della, which told Marin everything. Mrs. Ironwood, he said, I've been patient. Your grandfather's land is a liability without capital investment, and I have that capital. The window is 38 days. I think you know the reasonable outcome here. She's not leaving, Marin said. Burke turned to look at her with the mild surprise of a man encountering a variable he hadn't considered. Mrs. Hollis, this isn't. It's Marin. And this is my land manager, my registered co-operator for the Ironwood parcel, and my business partner. She said it without inflection, the flatness of a woman who has made a decision and is no longer interested in discussing it. The documentation has been initiated with the Extension Office. You'll receive confirmation through the appropriate channels. She looked at him steadily. I'd suggest you use the time before December to identify another acquisition, because this one is closed. Burke looked from Marin to Della. He reassessed. The men who fold when the mathematics change recognized a changed equation. He folded. After he left, Della looked at Marin with an expression she couldn't quite categorize, not surprised, not grateful, something more complicated and more durable than either. You didn't ask me first, she said. You're right, Marin said. I should have. A pause. Ask me now, Della said. So Marin asked her, standing in the yard with the spruce forest dark around the edges of the property and the sky going pewter with coming snow. She didn't make a speech. That wasn't either of their styles. I'm not easy to live and work with, she said. I'm set in my ways, and I've been alone long enough that I've stopped noticing my own habits, which is its own problem. I can't promise you a simple situation, but I can promise you honest partnership, fair dealing, and that I will look at what you build here and take it seriously. I think, she said, that's worth something. Della looked at her for a long moment. My grandfather said you were the most competent person he'd ever met in a crisis. He was too generous. He was accurate, Della said for the second time. She looked at the woodpile, then at the farmhouse, then at the long tree line that edged the north field. He always knew this would happen, she said quietly. He was just waiting to see if I'd get out of my own way long enough to let it. Did you? Marin said. Della picked up the axe. Ask me in a year, she said. But she was smiling. They filed the documentation before December. Della's name went on the co-management agreement and the Ironwood parcel was formally protected under a working agricultural use designation that Harlan Burke had no legal mechanism to challenge. The farm changed after that. Not dramatically, not overnight, but in the way that working land changes when two people are both paying full attention to it. The North Field Drainage Project, completed before the hard freeze, the equipment shed properly insulated for the first time in a decade, a winter garden added in the south-facing cold frame that Della designed and Marin built, and both of them tended. The red shed by the creek stayed closed that winter, but in February, on a morning when the cold had broken enough to smell the spruce properly, Marin opened it. She didn't say anything about it. She just unlocked the door and went in, and she was in there for a long time. When she came out, Della was at the top of the lane, splitting the last of the ash. She looked up. Marin was holding a set of hand planes, old ones, well made. My husband was a woodworker, Marin said. These are good tools. They shouldn't be in a box. She carried them to the house. That evening, Della made supper. Nothing was said about the shed. But the silence that lived in the kitchen that night was a different kind of silence from the one that had been there in October. Lighter, in a way that's hard to quantify and impossible to mistake. In the spring, when the ground opened up enough to begin the drainage work in earnest, Della found Marin at the north field with a spade, already starting. Marin looked up. The plans are good, she said. I'd like to understand the implementation. Della took the other spade from the fence post where Marin had leaned it. She looked at the field, already reading its grades and channels the way she'd read it on paper all winter. Start at the high corner, she said. Work with the slope, not against it. They started at the high corner, and somewhere north of Hearst, on 43 acres of boreal forest and river, and the best hay field in the region, the land that Joseph Ironwood had been born on was still in the family. Not waiting, not endangered, but working, which was the only thing he had ever wanted for it. In the end, that's what this story is about. Not the paperwork, not even the farm. It's about a dying man who trusted his granddaughter to a woman he'd met once, in the rain, on a broken road 40 years ago, and trusted the woman to recognize what she was being given before she understood it herself. That kind of faith doesn't make headlines. It doesn't ask for credit. It just keeps the land and the people on it from being lost.